Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of SBJ Live. I'm Dan Kaufman with Sports Business Journal. Thank you very much for joining us for this important episode of SBJ Live. This is Enhancing Accessibility in Sports Venues. I'm going to turn it over to our moderator and panelists in just a moment. But as you are filling in the webinar room here, I will go over a few logistics, as I always do for every episode of SBJ Live. Here they are. One, we definitely want you to interact and engage with us and with the panelists and with our moderator. What that means is you'll see a chat bubble on the bottom right corner of your screen for most of you. That's where we want you to message us, tell us who you are, where you're coming from. If you see people who you know who are messaging in that chat, please feel free to interact with them and engage with them. We definitely want and encourage that. And then right next to the chat bubble, you should see a questions bubble. That's where we want your questions. Don't wait till the end. There's no specific Q&A period in most of our SBJ Lives. We like to encourage our audience to give us the questions when they pop in your head, put them right in that questions bubble because other people can upvote the questions. So if someone sees that question go in there and they're like, oh, that's a great question, or I was going to ask that question, they can upvote it. And then the questions that get the most upvotes typically will be selected by our moderator, in this case, Brett McCormick, to make sure that we ask of our panelists. So don't wait till the end. Put your questions in there right when you get them in your head. And we hope we get a lot of questions from you. That's part of the beauty of this. It's live, it's interactive, and we want your questions. We'll probably go for about 40 to 45 minutes, maybe a little longer, but just know that we'll probably go around that 40 to 45 minute mark. And we really encourage you all to engage with us, interact with our panelists, and have a great time here on SBJ Live. Okay, with that, I'm going to take a few minutes just to introduce our panelists and our moderator, and then I'm going to drop, and then I will come back on towards the end. It's my pleasure to welcome to the SBJ Live stage Anthush Bolini. He is the co-founder and COO of One Court. We also have Donna Callahan. She is the founder and CEO of All in Sport Consulting, and also, notably, a Sports Business Journal Game Changer in 2023. And then we have Dr. Nanette Odell. She is the founder and CEO of LifeQuest Training and Consulting. And moderating all of this is our facilities reporter, Brett McCormick. Brett, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. It's the 35th anniversary this year of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and so very timely topic for us to discuss. I do want to say one thing quickly is please forgive my voice. When I went outside this morning, my car was the color of a tennis ball, and the pollen is within every inch of my body, I feel like. So having some itchy throat. So please bear with me. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. And Dan gave a nominal introduction of our three panelists, but I wanted to ask each of them to explain to us how they come at this issue, like their viewpoint and their experiences. And we can start with you, Donna, the game changer.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Brett and Dan, for hosting this conversation. It's near and dear to my heart as a disabled individual, a wheelchair user. I came to this space, as I mentioned, I am a disabled individual, wheelchair user. I became disabled as a result of transverse myelitis back in the early 70s. Yes, I know I'm aging myself. The transverse myelitis left me with incomplete paralysis at about the T10 level, so belly button. I was born into a very active family. My dad was a high school football coach and principal and athletic director, so anytime my family did anything, I was right there along with them. You can imagine in the early 70s, there wasn't a lot of adapted sport opportunities or that sort of thing. I've worked for national disabled sport organizations, including the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. I see some folks logged in here from the USOPC. And I decided a number of years ago to go out on my own and start All in Sport Consulting and kind of do all things related to the intersection of disability and sport. And that includes participation, grassroots efforts, venues, disabled fans, and kind of start my thing. There's not a lot of disabled leaders out there in the sports space, so I've kind of took it upon myself to be an advocate for in that space and represent the community, because there's no other perspective that's better than one coming from a disabled leader and advocate who's lived it for many years. And it's actually been very liberating. Working under various organizations, I've had to toe the line in different aspects, and now I can just advocate how I know and needs to be done. So it's been an incredible journey.
And Donna has worked pretty closely with Nanette over the years. Tell us about your background briefly.
It's actually a pretty common question. People ask how I got into this. And I say, my father's a minister, my mom's a nurse, and this is what I've done my whole life. I can remember being trained in respite care when I was in high school, working with kids with significant disabilities. So literally I've done this my entire life. And I'm also a person with invisible disabilities. But I was not a person who was really, I wasn't raised with sports. So as many of you maybe have been raised with sports, I was not. And so when I started working for the Suns and the Diamondbacks in January of 2012, I even in my interview said, I'm not a huge sports person, but I'm here to make sure that people with disabilities who are really into sports have equal access to them. And that's what I've been doing ever since. So I started the Venue Access Academy kind of to help venues across the country and beyond learn more about venue accessibility. And it's become a passion of mine. I have to say, I don't like follow sports, but I've definitely become quite a fan of the experience. And I love the memories that it helps people make. So I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
And like kind of a younger generation of person working on these sorts of issues and thinking about them. Antish, tell us what you're doing and how you came to this.
Yeah, thanks, Brett, and great to share the stage with you guys, Donna and Nanette. Yeah, I think, certainly being earlier in career, I'm really excited to share some of these insights. For me, to share a little bit of background, I'm an immigrant, was born in India and moved to the States in 2005. And I moved around schools a lot when I moved to the US. So like every 2 to 3 years, I was moving to a new school. And the way I found community and friendship was through sports. It really started with, having friends to play soccer with at recess. Then it was starting a cricket club in my middle school, where a lot of like South Asian kids and I would play cricket together. But then also more American students, right? So I think sports is such an important community. In junior high, it was a lot of the friends I had as I walked to school played on the football team. And I didn't know anything about American football. It also happened to be around the time when the Seattle Seahawks were on their, just magnificent run with the Legion of Boom. So I did a lot of studying on Sunday nights, watching Seahawks highlights, so I could talk about it at the cafeteria the next day or on the walk to school. So I think sports is just such an important community. It's a essential part of our culture, and everyone deserves access to that community and to that part of life. So that's a little bit about my motivations, but I was introduced to One Court when my co-founder Jared pitched this idea at my entrepreneurship program meeting when I was a senior in undergrad. So Jared's inspiration was from watching a video of a deafblind soccer fan at a game with a sighted woman who's watching the game and moving his hands around on a game board. And that process is called tactile signing. So Jared saw this video and as an industrial designer was inspired to create some technology that could scale that really intuitive experience. But what we found was that experience, while it was really intuitive, wasn't very common and obviously wasn't very independent for the fan. Most fans were using the radio to access the game, but the radio misses out on key contextual details about where the action is happening in real time. You miss out on where the ball is, where the players are. And in a sport like basketball or tennis or hockey, which is so fast paced, there's no way that audio description can deliver that experience in a way that is truly accessible. So what we're doing at One Court is creating a new category of broadcast. We call it our tactile broadcast. So fans can watch the game with their fingertips. And I think with a lot of technology and accessibility, we're really taking this angle of, hey, we've identified, a community, the blind and low vision community, which would really benefit from a tactile broadcast. But as we're finding with our own tech and so many other examples, like Microsoft says, design for one, extend to many. I think that, haptics and a tactile broadcast is fun and people like using it. And regardless of if you're sighted or not, people enjoy trying out our device. So I'm really interested to see how this new category of broadcast can become something much more commonplace, not just for fans with visual disabilities, but everyone.
Awesome. And if you guys want to read more about this topic, and especially one court, we had stories on both in this week's SBJ, which are online and in print. So let's give like a state of accessibility in sports venues right now. Donna, can we start with you?
Sure. So I think we're getting there. I think webinars and conversations like this are super helpful. We don't talk about disability in our society. So the more we talk about it, the more we get comfortable talking about it, the more we start asking questions, and the more we raise awareness. So the fact that we're even talking about this is great. And I think venues are getting there. What I would like to see is have sport leadership and sport venue leadership kind of go beyond the regulations of reacting to, I've got to check the box for the ADA and I've got to make sure I don't get sued. And so I'd like for them to really go beyond that checking of the box experience and go into a more proactive experience for disabled fans to, and I know you have a question later to talk about universal design, but to kind of engage those disabled fans, a diverse audience of disabled fans. So folks that Antouche works with low vision and blindness, hard of hearing, those with mobility challenges, and to really go beyond and engage that disabled fan community to say what works for you. And as you noted in your article this week, Brett, the Buffalo Bills have done a top-notch job doing that. And what happens? People are like, disabled fans are so excited that they've been considered and listened to and included in the conversations before a shovel goes in the ground. So that's where I think we're getting there, but I think we need to be more proactive and engage those fans as, even collegiate stadiums and venues, which are, heralded in, such history of years and years, that we need to talk about collegiate stadiums. We need to talk about professional, minor league, it runs the gamut. So I'd really love to see folks kind of go beyond the checking of the box of the ADA and really engage disabled fans.
Yeah, Donna, the Bills anecdote was a great example, because I told you when I posted that on Reddit, there were a lot of people that were like thrilled that the team was doing that. And then their next thing they said was how terrible the experience was in the current stadium. So it is sort of kind of representative of like where we are. There is, it could get better for sure. Nanette, how would you describe, I have kind of like the same question for you. Like, how would you describe the state of things? You have been involved with kind of the venue employee side of this.
Well, the venue employee side, but also buildings and facilities. So that's one of the main things we really look at is having a great experience for everybody. And that means having accessible buildings and facilities. And to what Donna was talking about, there's a saying that's nothing about us without us. And so you don't build something that's accessible without including people who have various types of needs, who've experienced barriers in the past and who know how to really work through some of these things. And so I think we've really seen an incredible increase. I've been teaching for the National ADA Symposium on venue accessibility for the last, I'm going to say 12, 14 years, I believe. And classes that we started, again, 12, 14 years ago on venue accessibility, at the time, there was very few people who had like a designated position of, let's say, something like disability services manager, which is what my position was with the Suns and the Diamondbacks. So you had very few people who had that as their title, or maybe even as, whether that was the official title or not. And so what's been nice is that there are people from way back then who are now disability services manager in that full-time ADA role within their organization. Because like Donna was saying, it's not about being reactive, which is oftentimes the case. It's about being proactive, and it truly is a full-time job. And so I think we've really seen an increase in that. And I know I can speak in terms of like MLB. They've even mandated, their commitment is so great that they've even mandated that a few representatives in every one of their clubs needs to get their ADA coordinator certification. There's a program through Great Plains ADA Center where you can get your ADA coordinator certification. You can go through the Venue Access Academy and get dual credit for the academy and the certification. But what that means is it's an investment on the part of MLB. Again, as an example, a commitment that all of their clubs are going to have a few representatives who've really gone above and beyond to make sure that they're not just checking the boxes, that they are better understanding individuals with disabilities, some of the barriers that they face, and then how we can overcome some of these or not build them in the first place. So it's exciting to see.
Yeah, and Antish, same question for you, because I think one thing that is really exciting about One Court is it's addressing a group that just really didn't get the benefit of the live experience, like the full live experience. And people with blindness are not the last group that are still, kind of held back from this.
Yeah, totally. I think that, plus one on both of the opinions that have been shared so far. I think there has been some really good momentum from an awareness perspective. And I think that culturally there is starting to see signs of change within organizations where they're beginning to talk about accessibility more and beginning to engage with the community more. But I think so much more has to happen in the engagement of the community, because frankly, like from my perspective, we always get asked like, oh, I saw that same video. I never thought about that. Or like, this seems so obvious. Like, how did no one ever think about this before? And sometimes I'm surprised that a league or a team didn't come up with it already, given that they were already immersed in the space. They had access to a lot of the technology that is powering our technology today. They have access to the fans and the resources, right? So I think there's a lot of innovation that can come from the teams themselves and from the leagues when they prioritize accessibility and inclusion, not even just as a single role, but as like a business priority across different verticals. And that's what we're really seeing with One Court, is that when we go to implement with a team, it's not just through one vertical within the team. It's not just through guest experience, or it's not just through partnerships. It's a variety of groups that are involved in bringing it forward, because it really does involve everyone to say, hey, we want to expand our fan base and we want to deliver a really good experience. So I think there's a lot of really good traction with fans who are neurodiverse. I think obviously there's been a lot of old standing like ADA requirements. So we see some of the mobility disabilities being addressed in stadium design, but there's still a lot of improvement there. But when you talk about fans who are blind or low vision, or perhaps who are deaf and hard of hearing, or so many others, there was literally no solution. There was nothing available for fans who are blind or low vision. So many fans would go to games and they would check out assistive listening devices, which are actually meant for fans who are deaf and hard of hearing, because it amplifies the announcer in the venue or some of the action that's happening on the field. So for us to hear that and talk to fans and understand that people are going to games, they're using a radio which can be delayed from anywhere from 10 seconds to 2 minutes, and they're behind the action, or they're using these listening devices which aren't designed for them. It was so obvious that, hey, like there's a need to prioritize and introduce some technology here. I think there's a lot also to learn from how clubs in Europe are doing things. Like some of the conversations we've had, and I had a chance to travel to London and meet some of the teams there. When I say prioritizing accessibility as like a business priority, like that's how they're really doing that. They have an accessibility sponsorship category in several of the teams, right? They have their fan experience leads and guest services folks, innovation folks are going out into the community and actually practicing co-design with members of the blind and low vision community or these other communities. So I think there's a lot of progress, as I said. I think it's becoming much more commonplace to be aware of it and to be talking about it. but there's still a cultural like shift that needs to happen in terms of prioritizing it not just as something that you are introducing to your venue, but something that you're introducing to your like business.
Yeah, no, that's a great segue. I had a question I was going to ask later, but I'll go ahead and ask Donna. Like, it's unfortunate that people with disabilities are overlooked because they're like such a unique set of fans. So maybe you can add some meat to what Antush said about the business case for this.
Yeah, so Antush, thank you for mentioning, how we don't talk about disabilities in our society, the business case and innovation. The cool thing is that disabled individuals are so incredibly innovative because we live in a world that doesn't work for us. So we oftentimes create our own solutions. And so I think tapping into that creative, innovative fan base and ask them what would work for you and tapping into all that technology. Even if you think about Comcast and you have your remote that you can talk into, that was created by a blind individual so that he could say, I just want to watch HGTV or ESPN or whatever it happens to be, rather than trying to figure out what channel they're on. But in my business, I've really focused and honed in on the business case for disability sport. And one, it's the adapted sports events that are going to communities, but also working on building that business case for the disabled fan. The one thing to know, and hopefully all you guys take this one thing away from today's session, is that the disability community is incredibly loyal. If they have a great experience at your venue, they will come back over and over and over again, and they will share their positive experience with their disabled friends and community. If they don't, it'll go the other way. So I have shoes and clothes and sweatshirts and cars and all these things that I'm very loyal to because they work for me and my two different sized feet, or different leg lengths, or the way that I drive my car. And so if you create a fan base that is loyal because your disabled fans feel heard and welcomed and listened to, then you're going to create this loyal fan base, which is going to increase the business case for inclusion of disabled fans. And I mean, we're on a sports business journal webinar, so we need to realize that the disabled community has such an incredible discretionary income base, and it's mentioned in my article that there's money out there they want to spend, and you have to understand that it's also families. So you could have a family with disabled children, you could have a family with disabled parents, you have elderly parents who need new places to sit and enjoy a game. Think about your season ticket holders as they age through and then pass down on tickets. So, I mean, there's so many intersections of where disabled fans fit in with the sport community that impacts the bottom line.
And you're talking about the fastest growing minority population in the world. So if we were like, we really need to focus on the teens or the tweens or the boomers, fastest growing minority population in the world. So that's a really great population to focus on. And there is
especially,
go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. Especially, I was going to say, especially as boomers have been, the sports industry's best fans and probably highest spenders for, at least a decade, maybe more, and are definitely aging into to this group. So, Nanette, can you tell us about your career in helping, in helping teams deal with this, and like some of the things that they need to think about to provide a better service, maybe even in the case where their venue is kind of limiting them?
Well, I think first and foremost is when we talk about the ADA overall, we need to remember this is not just a checklist. This is not just a checklist of the bare minimum that you have to do. And I think we talked about this in the article, was that if you meet the bare minimum of the ADA, you're looking at technically like a D, like you've passed the class, but that's it. And they had to start somewhere. They had to say, this is the bare minimum. But the truth is that we need to think beyond, what do I have to do, to how can I make the experience better for everybody? And so think about, for example, automatic door openers. Automatic door openers are, by the way, not required, but they're incredibly helpful, and I would highly recommend them. But those are going to be really helpful, for example, for Donna to get in. They're also going to be really helpful for me to get in when I have a lot of things in my hand. Curb ramps, when they were first developed, and they said, well, we're going to have to do them everywhere. But think about how helpful that is for you with your grocery cart or with a stroller or skateboard or bike or whatever. So when you look at that idea of creating things that are accessible, you're making them better for absolutely everybody. And so I think it's really a matter of looking at it from that perspective of what do I get to do to make the experience better for everybody. I hear in some cases, there's like, well, we don't have the money for this. But I tell you, they find the money when a lawsuit comes, which is unfortunate because you don't want it to have to be kind of this fear factor of, well, you have to do this. But the truth is, y'all, that 35 years since the ADA passed, there's a lot of things that we can do. So you can't potentially, change the structure of your building, but you can change, for example, making sure that you have accessible seating that's truly accessible for people with disabilities. You can do basic spot check to make sure that you have even something as simple as making sure that you have doors that are not too heavy. And if they have a closer, by the way, they're almost automatically too heavy. So you need to adjust those. Add automatic door openers. Your stall door should automatically close. And there should be handles on both sides. There's little things that you can do to check out your environment and make sure that it's more accessible. So I would say start with that, is look around and say, what can I do? Because what you might find is there's some barriers that are out there that you didn't realize. And this awareness is going to only make things better for everybody, truly for everybody. So,
Yeah. Donna, when we spoke, it struck me how many hurdles could potentially be in the way of just buying a ticket.
Yeah.
So tell us about some of the situations you encounter there, and like what maybe some things that could be shifted or that, even if there's not an answer yet, need to be thought about.
Yeah, and that's a way to also engage that diverse community again. Meet with them, go through that online ticket purchasing process, and make sure that the website is accessible, that the website highlights things you need to know as if you have a disability, say a mobility disability, and you're getting dropped off by Lyft or Uber, where is that accessible drop-off point for the ride share, and kind of just go through that whole process from buying the tickets. I can tell you personally, and I won't name the name, but I wanted to buy tickets to a baseball game. My husband and I to go to a game. He does not have a disability. And I had to call the ticket office. I couldn't just go online and look for accessible seats and buy them. And that should be within compliance within the ADA. If you ask Nanette, she knows that. And so this team is actually out of compliance with the ADA because say I'm restless and I can't sleep at night and I'm like, it's 1 a.m, I'm going to go buy a ticket, and I can't. I have to wait for the ticket office, and then I have to get someone. And then to make sure transportation is accessible on light rail to get to a particular destination, going through the ticket gates, going through and getting your concessions. Is the ketchup and the mustard bottle pump thing for my hot dog way up here? Am I going to drop everything on my lap? Are there more than accessible seat options than just, I did an audit of a minor league stadium a few years ago, and they just pulled out 2 accessible seats. And I'm like, well, what if I have a family with 3 children that have a disability? What if my son is a wheelchair user and is on a power soccer team, and that's where he wants to go for his birthday? And I have to have 2 kids here and 2 kids over here and 2 kids over there. So we just really need to think about the whole process from beginning to end. When I start to think about purchasing tickets, can I access that online? All the way until I leave the stadium. Is it a pain? Is it frustrating? Is it annoying? Is it not a great experience to get back and head home? And you want every fan, I imagine, to leave with a great experience. And so to walk through that whole process of what's involved for every fan, getting to attending and heading home, and what that looks like for a diverse group of people with disabilities.
Even
Right.
if their team doesn't win, they
Even
can
if their team doesn't win.
they can still leave with a great experience. The idea is those of us who are able-bodied, and by the way, they call us TABs, temporarily able-bodied, because you never know, we could join the club at any point. But think about it. If we experienced a barrier to purchasing the tickets, parking, entering, we had all these barriers come up, we would be pretty unhappy. And yet that's what people with disabilities as a whole, but specifically people who have mobility disabilities, who truly face these physical barriers left and right, it becomes very frustrating. And so you find yourself almost in a fight mode sometimes. And you see some people, by the way, who are almost in a fight mode of just asking for basic equal access. I mean, ADA is a promise. It is a promise for equal access to participation. And yet 35 years later, we're working on this promise still that we need to work on, a little harder to fulfill.
And the
Yeah.
ADA is the civil rights law for
Yes.
people with disabilities. It's no different than the 1964 civil rights law. And as Nanette said, it is access to participate in life and in your community. I grew up pre-ADA, so I can tell you, when I was 5 or 6 years old, I remember my parents taking us to an A's game, my brother and I, and we had seats in the middle of the row, and they kind of did a mosh pit with me to get me to the steps so my dad could take me up, to the restroom or concessions or whatever, but there weren't accessible seats at that time, and you just had to go with the flow. But now there's a law that says we have a right to this. And, and as Nanette said, it can be really exhausting and taxing mentally and emotionally with the various barriers that exist. So whatever your team venue can do to break those barriers, decrease those barriers, eliminate those barriers so that we can go and enjoy a game and not be frustrated is the ultimate experience.
Right. It was interesting too to read, looking through the stadiums that have been sued, that in multiple cases it was like kind of an inflexibility from game day staff to, these were rules that they could not break. A wheelchair could not be put in this one place when they were violating an actual, federal law. But maybe in some cases it just, it just requires more empathy and a little flexibility and to like work with people instead of, suddenly finding this to be the place to put your foot down.
Compassion, understanding, asking a few more questions, being patient, being creative in solutions. I mean, you're going to a game to cheer on a team. You're spending a lot of money to be there, and how disappointing to just come across just concrete answers. Because I'm sure if someone in a suite or a season ticket holder needed something, we would roll out the red carpet.
Sure.
Right?
One of the questions we've got from the audience is kind of an interesting one. Any suggestions for outdoor venues? Our races are all held outdoors and often depend on the accessibility of New York City. So guessing Jake is from the marathon world, potentially.
Yes, I know Jake, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I know that we can do tents if there's big receptions or celebrations after the New York City Marathon and expos and stuff like that. There are ways to create accessible venue and festival spaces as well. I actually have a friend who works in inclusive marketing, inclusive branding, and she's a Paralympian, and she is working with this group that creates really nice, accessible restrooms on trailers that can be pulled in and pulled out of, and they're like, and some of the venues or festivals that they've talked to are like, oh, well, disabled people don't come to our event. It's like, well, we don't come to your event because it's disgusting when we need to use the restroom. So any sort of options that you can think about, there are a lot of great resources out there. And I know Nanette has worked on different things like that. I know a person who works for the city of LA who has helped with the New Orleans Jazz Festival to create accessibility. And it's everything from those accessible porta potties being along a paved trail so that someone in a chair doesn't have to trek 100 yards over the grass, and having, helpful pavement and that sort of thing. So there are resources, Jake, and I'm happy to talk with you more about it. But yeah, it's a similar kind of look and feel of bringing in that community and saying what works, what doesn't work. How can we eliminate barriers so that everyone, attending to cheer on New York City Marathon runners has a great experience.
Yeah.
I just put something in the chat pod also. It's called the Planning Guide for Making Temporary Events Accessible from
Nice.
the ADA Center. So I just put it in the chat for everybody.
Excellent. Thanks for doing that. One more question from the viewers. Heather says, as someone who educates, prepares students to enter the field of sport management, what kinds of ways can these new professionals become allies for sports fans with disabilities? And do you foresee a job category or title that teams should create? So, Nanette, you kind of had this job. Do you think that it's becoming more common? I mean, I think it's good that MLB is getting people certified, but I don't know if that many teams are still putting somebody on this like full time.
Well, first off, I'm excited for the question, and I agree. I think absolutely it is a full-time job. So you think about a venue is like a mini city, and so it was a full-time job for me. I would say it was part-time between the Suns and the Diamondbacks. What I was really happy to see was after the position was initially eliminated with COVID, they brought it back though later on. They have a full-time person with each venue now. And the reason why is because you can really spend a good amount of time being proactive and really taking a look at things. If you're looking at your venue itself, let me assure you, it takes quite a while to just ensure that your venue is accessible. So there's compliance and there's accessibility, and you have to make sure you're compliant, but you really should make sure you're accessible. Really quick, explain the difference between those. You could have a bathroom stall that is technically compliant by the ADA, which means it meets the bare minimum standards. But you have a person who's in a wider wheelchair or a person who's in a scooter who can't turn and they literally could get stuck. It's compliant, but it's not accessible. So you could remove the wall in between, make it a larger stall, those types of things. So I do see more that there are people who are designated as, whether it's again, ADA coordinator, disability services manager. There are more people. I can't speak for all industries because I don't know the others as well, but I do see more people definitely within MLB, and I think definitely beyond. I mean, when I teach the classes for the National ADA Symposium, we have representatives from every sports category. And so that increased awareness, I think, is really helpful to, and so I do think that there is a good possibility that people can really focus on that. That's one of the reasons why we want to continue to teach people, because whether that becomes an official position or title or not, that increased knowledge is going to help everybody. It really is. So we hope that continues.
Yeah, and I would say the opportunity right now is really enormous because of all the renovations and new venues that are being built, like the Bills, for example. So in some cases, you've got you're starting from scratch, with a blank piece of paper, which is the best way. And then in others, which also was in the story, like Cedar Superdome, which was built pre-ADA, and it really had a hard time, complying with ADA. And when they did their $550 million renovation, ADA was like a central tenet around which the whole thing was designed. So I think the opportunity for like voices and advocates on it is immense. Antiyush, are there certain technologies or tech advancements that you think could play a bigger role in making sports venues more accessible? And I'm not speaking about like specifically like OneCourt, but just like broadly, like types of technologies.
Yeah, totally. Before I answer that question, I want to go back to the previous chat question about the roles. I totally agree with Nanette's perspective on, for sure, like having someone on the ground always thinking about fans who can like execute a lot of these different programs is really important. But I would also say that, a lot of the progress that we've made in going from team to team, because this role is not very common, we've had to get pretty creative and, figuring out what the value add is for these teams and who to pitch to. And I would say, our first partnership with the Portland Trailblazers, what really sticks out to me there is Matt Gardner's role at the Portland Trailblazers, Senior Director of Customer Insights. And that role is so interesting because he's positioned in a way to get buy-in across different departments, right? Like you can't execute something for accessibility sometimes through just guest experience or through just like facilities. Like it takes buy-in sometimes from partnerships, from technology, from marketing, from ticketing, from community, and having a role that is centralized where you're living in a free space and you are both in between both the business side and the human side of an organization allows you to actually push those things through. So it's not labeled as a role that is focused on accessibility, but his job description is literally thinking about who are our fans, how can we understand them better, and how can we bring in new fans to make our game experience something that is fun and accessible to everyone. And as a part of that, one court fit into something that he was thinking about in the big picture, right? So I just wanted to call that out. For your second question about technologies, again, I think a lot of people will ask us, hey, why hasn't one court existed before? And a lot of it is on the timing. There's a lot of technologies that support one court that are now available and becoming more commonplace in sports that power this. The first one is the availability of tracking data, knowing where the ball is, where the players are, and having that data be delivered in real time. It's fairly new. I mean, Hawkeye, yes, has been around for a while, but in terms of the NBA, Hawkeye was only rolled out last year. And it's tracking data so quickly, and we're able to deliver an experience in under half a second, right? So we're talking about a real-time experience. And I think that technology is just going to filter down to more and more levels of the sport. We always get asked, like, hey, like, when can I use this at a little league game to watch my son play? Or when is this going to be available for more of like the blind sports like beat baseball or goalball, so that you can actually empower like local communities to like participate. So I really think that the availability of tracking data is huge. I think when you look at 5G and cellular, how quickly that's getting. You look at Wi-Fi as something that's becoming much more consistent across venues, because frankly, like when we are connected to a Wi-Fi network in a venue, if it's something that is not really robust or not very consistent, if like that severely impacts our technology. Like it won't work in certain areas of a bowl if you don't have, a Wi-Fi network that is consistent. So those are just some basic technologies that I think really enable accessibility. It's a lot of these technology, which enables any technology, is going to help assistive tech, right? It's not necessarily that there's, I would say, you have to go out of your way to implement some technology that is only going to provide you with the ability to build an assistive tech. Like any tech that you're building in for broadcast, for fan experience, and more is going to help you deliver something like this.
Right.
So, Brett, can I mention something real quick? If we talk about, I know Jake asked about outdoor venues, and I think this is a good time to talk about this. But in 10 years, we're going to have 2 Paralympic Games in our country. So they're going to be indoor venues and outdoor venues. So we really need to focus on creating accessibility. And my hope is that by hosting Paralympic Games, the first time in LA, second time in Salt Lake City, but that we start to elevate that conversation about accessibility and inclusion in sport, and that it broadens this conversation about disability is not scary. We don't need to be fearful of it, and kind of open up a broader conversation so that people can be comfortable talking about disability, talking about inclusion in sport, bring in those technologies like One Court. But I think there's a real opportunity over the next 10 years to create this really amazing legacy about sport inclusion for fans and participants as we host the Paralympic Games in the next 10 years.
Yeah, great point. Somebody asked, that much of this discussion is focused on pro sports. Have you seen any buy-in from the NCAA or college ADs?
I did write a similar article for NACDA. What is it? National Association of College Athletic Directors. I did not get any responses similar to the one I wrote for Sports Business Journal. Again, I think there's this really long history in some of these venues, but those venues need it the most. And they need to get on board too, not only because of ADA, but because of the Rehab Act of 1973, 73, 74, 73? I can't remember. But which states that any agency that receives federal funding must follow similar rules to the ADA, but that was 50 years ago, right? Versus 35 with the ADA. So if anybody should be on board with this, all collegiate venues, stadiums, arenas should be in line with all of this as well. And they also have lots of boosters that are aging, and alumni that buy in and donate to the university. And the last thing you want to do is alienate an aging family that has supported a team for a long, long time. So again, there's that business case, not direct, but if they're like, I had a miserable time, I'm not giving your team money anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think
one less. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, from our experience starting as a school project, the first group we went to was the University of Washington athletic department and the football team. Go Dogs. But the challenge was that we learned that while they were tracking like player location, they were doing it in practice. They had players wearing, the catapult trackers during the games, but they didn't have access to the live tracking data during the game, and they weren't tracking the ball. It's not because they couldn't afford, Hawkeye technology or some of these other technologies that are implemented at the pro levels, but it's because, NCAA also has a stance that they want to have an equitable approach across all of the teams and all of the departments. So yeah, you might have some teams that can afford it, but you might have other teams and departments that can't afford it. And I see that perspective, but at the same time, if you can make the game more accessible to fans anywhere, and sure, if it's only going to start with a few teams, then I think it's still worth to implement some of these technologies that are going to enable better broadcasts, that are going to enable better fan experiences, that are going to be better for player health and training. Because the technology is there. It just has to be implemented at the collegiate level and other levels of the sport. Like baseball has their StatCast data available both at the major leagues and at the minor leagues, right? So I think it's certainly something that could be implemented across all levels of the sport. But yeah, there's some decisions to be made in how we think about standardization across those venues.
Yeah. One last question, and then we'll bring Dan back in to wrap up. Donna, you mentioned bathrooms better than porta-johns, which I think would appeal to anybody on this call.
Yeah.
And I think it leads to a good point where I did want to ask you about universal design, because I've been hearing a little about it, in all these renovations and new builds that I'm covering. And I just wanted you to explain that, because I think it speaks to your example also of the remote control that you can talk to.
Yeah. So universal design, and the way that I think about it, and it was started by professors and engineers and architects at North Carolina State University. You type in universal design principles, it'll come up on Google. But there's 7 particular principles, but a lot of organizations are starting to use it now in how they're looking at building their spaces. And it basically creates an equal playing field so that everybody can have an equal experience. It's not disabled people over here, we have a separate experience than the non-disabled people. And so it's a way that you can move through and experience a venue or a product equally as someone without a disability. And there's different principals that you can interact with and can highlight and prioritize as you're building. A great example is the Olympic and Paralympic Museum in Colorado Springs. Everybody comes through the front door the same way. You go up an elevator and then you all go down the ramps and experience together. So a family with kids or parents with a disability can experience it together. It's not, okay, we're going to the third floor now, mom and dad, you take the stairs, kids take the elevator. So everyone can experience a venue in the same way. And people might think it costs a lot more, but I think, as Nanette said, if you do it and you do it proactively with a plan and you strategize about it, it's going to make the experience so much better, not just for disabled fans, but for all fans.
There's a saying in the ADA world that is pay now or pay later. And I'm going to give you a very, very good example. So I'm going through a venue that I worked at years ago, and the same suite level that I always came through, I saw these feedback boxes, and these feedback boxes were about at 54 inches, which is too high, and they came out about 4.5 inches. And at 4.5 inches, they would be considered a protruding object. It was something that they had literally just had created, and they installed it. And of course there was branding, and the idea was people put their feedback in there. Well, they immediately had to take all of them down in the venue because, number one, they were too high. So you could say, we're just going to lower them. But the fact that they were about 4.5 inches out from the wall meant that they were protruding objects for people who are blind. So they ended up having to completely redesign these and then reinstall them. So you had these little areas you can kind of see where it had been installed before and then where they put it down. But if they had checked with their designated ADA coordinator from the very beginning, it would have taken me a split second to say, it needs to be 3 3/4 inches deep as opposed to 4 1/4. So those types of things, that's the idea, is just to become more aware, do it right the first time so you don't have to do it again, and make it better for everybody as a result.
Excellent place to finish. Turn it over to you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you. I'm back up here because I unfortunately have to say that we're out of time, which is disappointing because this was a wonderful discussion. I thank you all very much for your time. Donna and Thush and Nanette, thank you very much. A round of applause to you. Brett, thank you for bringing it all together. To the audience, thanks for sticking around for this. We really appreciate you doing so. There was a question from an audience member about whether or not this is recorded. Absolutely, it is recorded. And all of our SBJ Live episodes go up on SBJ's YouTube channel. And you can find this one there probably by tomorrow, maybe by the end of the day today. Next week on SBJ Live, we have part 2 of our How the Sports Industry Uses Artificial Intelligence. And that episode will focus on using AI to create and distribute digital content. I hope to see you there next week. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.